Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week of the Digital Leaders Show. Today, we're discussing records management and governance in the age of AI with InfoGov expert and San Jose State University Professor Emerita Patricia Franks, plus other headlines for digital leaders. We're live each Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. We're talking key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology with a special focus on automation, AI, and digital transformation in hopes of making you a better digital leader. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up the Institute for RPA and AI, as well as the Digital Enterprise Institute. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. You can check us out at irpaai.com. My co-host is Chris Cerdak. He's a former advisor for the White House Chief Transformation Office, automation AI practice lead at EY, and partner of digital transformation at Gartner. Chris, good afternoon.
How are you? I got to get a logo vest. That's pretty cool. I just noticed that.
Well, you know, I can't show you what's behind the camera over here, Chris, but I have this really fancy elliptical machine that I never use, but works as a coat hanger for all my Zoom calls. So before I have I just throw on my vest, and it's the Zoom world we all live in these days.
Well, everybody has that non-functional, but I'm going to use it someday, like piece of exercise equipment. It's kind of like RPA bots, actually.
We haven't even got into it. You're getting somebody in trouble somewhere. Well, listen, you know, I say this every week, lots in the news, but I got to tell you, Chris, I'm usually pretty good at waking up in the mornings, you know, scraping a few headlines and having something to like a stream of consciousness for this session. And I'm just overwhelmed by all of the AI. I mean, it's digital transformation, but it's just, you can't escape the AI headlines. I mean, they are everywhere.
I found myself quite busy this weekend trying to keep up with it all. You know, from Gemini Gate to I don't know if you saw the one post where there's the first litigation against AI companies for fraud. So there, you know, an AI company actually just had 1,000 employees offshore that was doing the stuff that was supposedly AI. So it's, you know, the old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times.
It's very interesting, and you know what struck me. I mean, yes, the Google thing was, I don't know, not surprising, but you know, maybe a little bit concerning in the sense that this thing's kind of like almost launched a few times now, and this was like the new big launch that they had everything figured out, and guess what? They don't, right? And this is Google. I know they just cut a whole bunch of workforce, which is, you know, also concerning for our industry, but you know, if Google doesn't have the resources to make a launch that's this important, not have this kind of issue, then you know what happens with a bunch of guys in a garage somewhere in a emerging market.
Well, and it does bring up the interesting question, and I have no idea what the answer is, but if this was intentional, that's concerning. If it wasn't intentional and it was accidental, that's also really concerning. Either way, I mean, what this shows is that the level of control that we think we have is pretty delusional. And I think that's consistent with a lot of what we've seen in automation over quite some time. If you believe that you really have control of this stuff, that belief is going to be reinforced right up until you no longer do. And the stronger your belief, the worse the consequences when you find out it's not true.
Yeah, you know, my concern with it also is, you know, if we as technologists are struggling with this, then how does the average consumer decipher this? I mean, you know, we were talking before we went live with our guest about, you know, just, you know, there's layers of AI now that are behind the information that you're served. At least, you know, a few years ago, you Googled something and yeah, you could find a lot of junk out there. But at the end of the day, if an intelligent person was having a conversation, you say, Chris, where did you see that? You still knew where it came from, at least. Then you could debate the validity of that source. But now you don't even have that source. I saw an article on Wired where they'd interviewed this guy. They're calling him the the clickbait kingpin. He goes and buys domains that people have forgotten about or haven't renewed, or companies that had traffic and then they went out of business, especially the last couple of years, and basically builds a clickbait media site, making a lot of money off of it. And now he's using all AI to create these articles. So here's a source that you trusted at one point. Now you go to that page, it looks kind of similar to what it did before. You might not initially catch it. And all of the content there has been written by AI bots.
At some point I'm going to have to dust it off, but I have an outline for a book I call Attentionomics. And that's basically all this is. It's monetizing eyeballs, which we've been doing for the better part of 15 years. Just AI lets you do it potentially at scale, incredibly inexpensively. Is it producing massive amounts of garbage? Probably, but that's the nature of Attentionomics.
I also, this is connects to our main topic today. Like, how do you then how does search work? Like this article had some concerns. The author of the article reached out to Google, and her opinion was that they didn't seem that concerned about it, which is also alarming, right? So is it they don't know? Do they know something we don't? Like, this is not going to be a problem in a year or two, or they just don't know how to deal with it. What is search? I mean, even as it is today, I have a Chat GPT plugin in my Google, so I got to really pay attention to see what search results I'm getting that are actually coming from Google and what's coming from this extension.
I've challenged people for the better part of a decade, because it's been going on for at least a decade. If you do a Google search, take the time to go to the 4th or 5th or 6th page of results. I forget the exact statistic, but something like 97% of all searches on Google don't go beyond the first page. And so if page placement is for sale, which is what Google does, that's how they make their money, it's selling advertising, which is all placement on the page, then if you never go past the first page, all you're getting is quite literally paid advertisement. And it may be true, but by its very nature, you're going to get a very biased viewpoint. So I'm kind of glad it happened. It's very disturbing. But finally we're pulling aside the curtain, and you can see that the Wizard of Oz is kind of an old guy trying to get his balloon to fly again, as it turns out.
Yeah. Well, and the good news, I guess that's subjective, but I was going to say, what's kind of exciting about it is that there's also just as many, really technologist, futurist, storylines coming out. There's this news, this was in Business Insider, but it was widely reported. Klarna, this fintech, has had huge success with its new AI assistant, which is Chat GPT based. They're saying it's doing the work of 700 people, and they've done a hiring freeze as a result. So you start wondering, well, maybe we don't need to do things exactly the way we were doing them before, doing them pre-pandemic. It was so powerful that a couple of the call center, because this is customer facing now, not just the back office stuff, right? Customer facing, that the stocks of some of the largest call center companies that they do business with, directly or indirectly, plunged as a result of these announcements.
Well, and to me, this is a perfect example of what we get with AI, and it's the typical hype cycle. I saw this as well. And then if you dig into it a bit, into the story, there's a number of people that are saying, yeah, we use the AI, but it's not very good. The results it provides are fairly uncompelling. And then if you press it at all, it will very rapidly put you online with a human. So, and this is very typical of what we see with automation, and it's consistent with all the research, particularly like with ChatGPT, where the technology can uplift the lower proportion of people in a normal distribution, right? So your worst workers can be improved pretty dramatically with the use of the tool, and your best workers can maybe do what they do a little bit faster, but at best, you're simply shifting the lower quality human workers up to kind of the average. And I think that that's representative here. So when you give these dramatic statements, oh, we got rid of 700 people, we're saving so much money. Yeah, but I mean, there's more to the story than I think is typically shown. And it's worthwhile to kind of dig into the stories to get a better sense for what value you're really getting. I mean, is it valuable? Absolutely. But will the use case survive the elimination of your whole human workforce? Probably not.
Yeah, I think the issue, the answer is probably somewhere in between. I think there's a confluence. There's a couple things happening here. It's not, even when you look at the tech job, the layoffs and stuff, and the initial, storyline was, hey, there's definitely an AI thing. It would be silly to ignore that. But I think there's also, and maybe some reshuffling, but I think there's also some reality check of not just jobs that were created at some point that weren't eliminated, maybe for PR reasons and HR reasons, where organizations had to do things differently. I was speaking to a member yesterday who's at a very large bank in Asia, and he said, we didn't have a choice. Like, we were completely shut down by COVID. And so we had to figure out other ways to do things. If we were gonna, not go out of business, basically, is the way he put it. So it was a executive level mandate to do that. And now you come back and say, well, if we did it during COVID, then why don't we continue doing it that way, right? And then this gets back to your favorite topic, which is just the process thing. A lot of this is just broken processes that were never fixed for decades, right?
Well, I think very strongly that people discount a significant factor in all of this digital transformation and stuff. We've effectively had free money for about 16 years, ever since the housing and market collapse of 2008. And for a while, we had literally negative interest rates, which is anti-capitalism. Right? And so organizations didn't have to be efficient, didn't have to be effective. They could be
throw bodies at it,
and so I think it's something like a third of the Fortune 500 companies are zombie companies, right? They consume more cash than they produce, which is fine as long as you still have access to credit, but those days are over. And so I think there's going to be a little bit of a necessary market correction. Now, is that going to be very painful? Yeah. But the economy isn't about money shifting around. The economy is about producing things. And I think a significant proportion of the economy, of the current workforce, doesn't actually produce much. So if we're kind of like being forced to actually be productive again, it's going to be painful for a while. But I think in the long run, we're going to be much better off for it.
Interesting. Well, on that note, Chris, would you like to introduce today's guest?
I would love to introduce my good friend Patricia Frank, who is a notable expert in the world of records management and information governance, which sometimes can be thought of as a dubious honor. We governance people aren't necessarily popular, but Patricia and I have met a few times, spoken a few times, and is a phenomenal expert in the space. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here.
Among the things that I wanted to discuss with you is obviously you've done a lot of writing and so forth. I know that you're working on a new book, which is on governance and records management, but with a specific spin on AI. Can you talk a little bit about your interest in that area and what you're seeing in terms of the industry having a focus on this going forward?
Yeah, unfortunately, I was speaking a little earlier to Daniel off the mic here, and the second edition of the book came out in 2018, and it wasn't much different from 2014, the first edition. But as I'm trying to work through this third edition, all I am, I think, concerned about is how to reflect the reality while making sure that we're staying with the firm records and information management principles, which I think are the foundation. I think all of the problems we're having here is because we're going away from the governance aspect, if you will. So the hype is fun, but it doesn't always work. And with the book, what I'm finding is every chapter that I used to do that would be discrete. For example, physical records management or electronic records management was a big deal. Now, every place we have either automation or artificial intelligence infused in some way, either in the technology, in the decision making, whatever it may be. So it's a challenge to reflect how records information managers can stay true to their principles and yet utilize this AI efficiently to govern not only records as in the past, but data and information as well.
Are you finding that people are aware of the challenges that AI is bringing to this space, or is it kind of an afterthought and oopsie, we deployed something and we're not ready to manage it. Let's do something retroactive.
I think there's several different stakeholders, and so they have different views. So I was speaking to an AI developer, and he's having a ball because he's developing this product for a large bank, and it's going to be fantastic. But yet he's working with IT people, Daniel, and you're coming from maybe that background, who are saying, what are you doing? There are some things out there in the market we might be able to use. We can plug in. They want to be responsible for it and control it, right? So if they're not developing if they can recommend a purchase and if they could integrate it somehow with their system, then that's under their control. At the same time, the records and information managers are saying, nobody's asked us. You're going to have problems. I mean, we're the ones who are concerned with the laws, the rules and regulations, the ethics behind the use and the development and the creation of these records, and then how they're going to be managed in the future. So from the RIM perspective, I'm having people reflect their concern over a couple of things, being able to identify the records being created, being able to figure out what they have to capture, how they're going to maintain that. And then also, though, saying we can use AI maybe within our own records and information management processes, but we don't have the budget to do it with the high-priced trained models that will be able to get us up and running quickly. And we don't have the time or the staff to be able to do that supervised training that some of the lower-priced solutions might be. So I think every place that you are, every role that you hold, you have a different perspective on how you're going to look at this whole world of AI.
I'm curious, Patricia, there's so much of the conversations I have, and I realize I think what's important now is the debate is not if this is good. The reality is it's happening, right? So, but I am curious, for someone who's been doing this as long as you've been doing, a third edition of your book. Do you feel right now at this moment in time that the positives outweigh the negatives, or vice versa?
Well, again, that depends. I love that. It always depends, right? So what are we using it for? If we were using it to control information in a controlled environment, say in the law firm, where they found that they get into trouble if they go into court with something created by a public chat GPT. But if they use a search engine with a repository like data repository for LexisNexis, Westlaw, which is credible information. And if it's trained on that credible information, you're getting good information and you're able to do a lot of really great things. So in that case, with something that was developed specifically for your environment, trained on a model that's going to achieve what you want it to achieve, you trust that the information you're getting out of it is accurate, and you're able to go back to the source, as you were talking about earlier, and say, yes, that really is something that we should be able to use, then I think it's a good thing. I think one of the problems with AI, if it's public AI especially, is that we have this bias toward automation. Some people who are not well educated, perhaps in AI and how it works, would say, well, AI told me so it's true. And we saw that in Detroit a couple of times, where they're in the middle of lawsuits by people who were arrested because AI told them those were the criminals, and they weren't. And they were embarrassed, brought in, spent time in jail. And then they realized that it was the problem with the interpreter, the detective that went to do the arrest. They didn't use it as a resource one thing they should look at while they look at many other factors before they make a decision. So again, it depends what you're using, who you are, what your goals are for it.
It reminds me of there's a story that someone told me once when I was working in the regulatory space where the bunch of people are hacking their way through the jungle trying to get to some destination, and someone stops them and says, hey, we're going in the wrong direction. And everyone turns back and says, shut up, we're making progress. I kind of feel like in the information governance space, particularly in AI, because it's such a wild, wild west sort of scenario, there's a little bit of feeling of that we'll worry about governance later. Right now, there's a land grab and we have to participate. Do you get a little bit of a sense of that?
But we did that with social media too. I wrote something about that in 2009, when President Obama was really behind the use of social media. And it was a Wild West show. And I interviewed a lot of people in different government facilities, including the FBI and the IRS down in Washington, to see what they thought. And the records managers, because we're the control freaks, right? So they said, I didn't even know they were doing that. Do we have a team? If we have a team, I should be on it. And then they'd send me email later saying, I'm now on the team. But it was after the fact. And then after the fact, maybe a year later, is when NARA came out with guidance, their first guidance on it. So it's not unusual that the technology precedes the governance. It's unfortunate, but it's not unusual. And even with the governance, it's voluntary right now that you follow the governance, like NIST governance for AI risk management. It's not mandatory, and it can be overwhelming. If you saw NIST's handbook, it's easy to go through 72 different actions and, be able to document all 72. You're not going to do that. So it's difficult right now to get the right kind of guidance, I think, to make you feel comfortable.
Do you have a couple of rules of thumb, though, that people could look to for that? Of the 72, what do you think are the 5 greatest hits?
Well, I won't be able to repeat them verbatim, but what I'm thinking is that they're always looking at the way the data, first of all, was captured for use. So the data sets, what's your provenance? Provenance is a word that actually appears in some of the governance documents. And so can you trace that data back to where it was created, and then be able to say that it is quality data, that it would represent the characteristics that a record would. And what we're finding with something like generative AI, when you were talking about it, is that we can't do that with that. Because, if it's scraping things on the internet and we're throwing things out on the internet, it's not necessarily true. So I think one of the big things is that we have to be able to have quality data sets. That means also they shouldn't have holes in them. They shouldn't have incorrect information, even if it's just because of an error. And if we were talking about somebody like in our field in records and information management, somebody asked us for data sets so that we could be able to train a model to identify invoices, well, then we're responsible. We better make sure that those are quality, that they contain correct information, they don't have gaps in them, and so on. So I think you start with the beginning of the data life cycle and take a look at your data sets, and then you look at your models, and are your models ideal for what you want to achieve? And if you're running those models on the training data, that's fine, and you've got to keep making sure that it's validated, that you're achieving the results that you want to. But you have to have impact assessments too, and they mention that a lot in the NIST documents, that you've got to know, okay, so you run this, what's your goal and what's your impact on the end user? Now, the illustration I made was the end user was this detective who made an error and now he's being sued. That's a possible impact, right? That you want to try to prevent. So there we're looking at the model. So we're looking at data sets, we're looking at models, and we're going forward with the testing and evaluations, and they're big on that. Make sure you keep testing to be sure that you're getting the results, the desired results, and then take a look at the users, the end users, and provide a way for feedback. They're big on feedback as well, not just from a developer standpoint, but from somebody who's going to be finally impacted with it. So it's your customers. Right now with that Gemini, we certainly saw that the people who are using Gemini for questions and answers are giving feedback very rapidly and very publicly, so that you're going to get what, that $90 million, whatever it was, decrease in value, or is it $1 billion decrease in value of the organization. So that's the really important thing. So those are the things they're saying. Make sure there's a way for feedback, for testing, evaluation, to train your models to use good quality data sets, to make sure, I think, that the right stakeholders are involved all along the way. And I think that's the one thing that I've been concerned with the records management IG piece, is when they talk about stakeholders, they talk about business, data scientists, data providers, data stewards, all these new names. I don't see information governance and records management in there. We have to push our way in there. Because if they're saying in the beginning, well, we're going to get data from somewhere, it's a data provider. Well, who's the data provider? And who's going to be able to say that it's accurate data? And also, if we're going to do some governing, when I look at the whole AI process, what I see is beyond that as well, because we're saying we're working in a system that has those laws and regulations. And so that's the external feedback that somebody also has to keep providing, right? And that should be fed back into this. And some of us were doing some work, not me specifically, my colleague, on some of the AI that is working with real-time sensors, and how is it making decisions with real-time decisions, those autonomous vehicles, for example, and where is it picking it up from? And how is it using it to make decisions? And can that be overridden? Where's the human in the loop? Should there be one? I think that's another big question. Where's the human factor? In some cases, they're saying a human should take a look at some of this, So I guess I've given you more than just a few, but those are the things that are in those 72 different factors that should be looking at. And mainly they're in an audit column, if you want to look at it that way. They're all talking about, we've got to audit this to make sure it's doing what we want it to do, and that it's ethical and it's reliable.
Patricia, if you think about, a record management system, what are some of the chief privacy and security challenges that you think of, and what's your recommendation for organizations trying to address these issues?
Oh, well, you're always worried about now the PII, right? And sensitive information, because that's where bad actors are trying to leverage their ability to get into our systems. And so we have to be able to recognize, I think, within our systems, what the sensitive information is, make sure that we're only keeping the data minimization principle, only keeping what we need to keep, and only for the right amount of time. And I think there are some AI tools now. If we look at Amazon with all of its silos, we all have storage of something in Amazon right now. I do, I know, because I'm working with a second party that has them as a third party, and that's where my stuff is. And so they have a tool right now so that they could go through all of your silos of information in order to identify sensitive information and let you know where it may be, so that you could act upon it however you should be able to. So I think that's one of the big things. And I think that ties in with AI, because when we're talking about data sets for training, some of it will have sensitive information that we have to either anonymize, get out of there, or maybe in some cases there's not even enough information, or we don't want to use any of ours even anonymized. So what we would do is use synthetic data, have a way for machine learning to be able to create some data that we can use. So I may be getting off track, but I think one of our biggest challenges is the whole issue of sensitive information. Also, we were worried about blockchain just a couple of years ago, and that it may contain some information that was sensitive. And how within a system like that do you redact it? How do you go in and identify where it is and get rid of it? If somebody says, I have a right to privacy, you cannot keep my information longer than you should. So I think that's one of the biggest things. I see a lot of opportunities with it. I see wonderful opportunities for integration of all the different systems. I see it as a real boon to those working behind the scenes, records management, but also content management, whatever it may be, that we should be able to easily and effortlessly go from one system to another. And we're starting to be able to do that. I was mentioning to Daniel earlier, Chris, about the Microsoft 365 SharePoint, and now the ability to have a plug-in a connection to Preservica in order to identify this as something that has to be preserved for the long run, where you used to download that, get out of that system, upload it into another system for preservation. Now you're seeing a click transfer. It's all behind the scenes. So I see a lot of opportunities there, but I see a lot of concerns. The concerns are a lot in the use, the humans. We know that. So we've got to have the right, I think, roles and ability for only those people who need to see the information to be able to see the information. So our access controls are really essential. And I think that's where we slip up sometimes within organizations. You know, we say, oh, it's okay, that person died. Don't worry about them. They're not going to get into their account anymore. Well, somebody else is. You know, you should have gotten rid of it. So I think it's a lot of practical things that we have to be concerned with, and a lot of mistakes humans make that we have to be on the lookout for.
Patricia, 20 years ago, SharePoint was the way of circumventing information governance and records keeping. So the idea that it's now the source of governance is actually pretty amusing to me. You bring up another interesting challenge, which is the multi-jurisdictional aspect of this, right? Because you have the EU going one way with GDPR. You have all kinds of new privacy regulations coming up in individual U.S. states. Someday there might be a federal privacy statute of some kind. I know I've been dealing with a lot of other countries where they're starting to put this in place. So do you find that the jurisdictional sort of framework that organizations have to live in is getting more complex, or I would argue potentially less complex, as long as you're consistent across them? What's your sense of that?
Well, you know what we saw with the GDPR with privacy is that California then kind of mimicked that. And then the other states are mimicking California and Virginia. And so we're seeing some, even though we don't have an overarching in the United States, we're seeing some kind of agreement on the big picture, and that individuals have a right to privacy. We may call it something different in different countries, but we're looking at that. And I see with the AI governance with the EU Act, the fact that they were able finally to get the EU member countries to agree on at least this is what's unacceptable AI, this is what is, high risk, and these are the kind of controls we should have around that. I think that's a good thing, and I think we're sharing across countries. We were looking for examples of governance documents, and we found a great one in Singapore. So we're seeing a lot of commonalities. I think eventually it's going to be very useful. We always have to remember the jurisdiction we're in, because each of the states will have a slightly different kind of AI law. It's not just all about privacy. It may be about the kind of use that you're going to be able to have for your AI. And so, or it may be linked to some existing already laws and regulations. So I think we're going to have to feel comfortable that the world is getting at least to some kind of consensus on the big picture, and then be aware of how we're operating. If we're operating and we're going to be governed by the GDPR, then naturally we're going to be worried about the EU AI Act as well. But then we're also going to look at what state are we in and what kind of regulations are within that state, and then our industry and how is our industry like FINRA governed, and what are they saying about it. So it's going to be as challenging as ever, maybe more so, but I don't think it's going to be much different. And I think the high level agreement is going to be very helpful to us.
Patricia, how important is a comprehensive data governance framework? Chris, don't jump in. I know you want to jump in here. Let Patricia go first, because I know this is you're passionate about this. But you think about risk management, right? Mitigating risks. What do you recommend?
Oh gosh, for data governance, I think this is where RIM can really help. because there are a lot of things we can do for responsible AI that apply to data governance as well. Of course, policies and procedures. And so data governance has to be governed by, for example, retention and disposition policies. And you could have them separate. But what we're seeing is an inclination to look at, so what's the records management, retention, schedule, policy, whatever you want to call it, how can we bring those together, harmonize them if they were separate documents, but better yet, bring them into one document. So a data and records retention, for example, policy or schedule, I think would be a good thing. So I think that as far as good data, we could help with that. We can also help with, depending on what kind of data sets you want to work with, right? We could make sure that on our end, we get rid of the rot, we get rid of all of this, these files and this data that is no longer necessary, so that we could have good data sets if they want to be using them within our organization. I think we can help with the sensitivity classifications within that data, make sure that the data that is being used for training is not releasing any sensitive data, any IP. So that kind of thing is important. Sensitivity is not just, of course, PII, it's also, is that confidential? It's, so all of those things. And we're used to using things like labeling and tagging and classification, and a lot of AI benefits from taxonomies and ontologies, ways to classify information, and that helps with training the models and actually the way they work. So I think data governance is essential. We have to worry about the data lifecycle management, the data assurance, the transparency, accessibility, compliance, anything that needs to be protected, how to monitor for data buy-ins, discrimination, and then, of course, all those ethical considerations like fairness built into the system. Did you get consent, privacy? So it's very important. I mean, you're starting with data for your AI model, so that has to be quality right to start.
Chris, any final thoughts, final questions for Patricia?
In your view, because I know you deal with this a lot, Pat, how do you sell governance, particularly to the pioneers, the people that are rushing to implement their AI and get out there as quickly as possible? Yeah, what's the messaging, the elevator pitch, if you will, that you use to get people on board with the need for some structure and some controls?
Well, I don't have a pitch, so I'll have to develop one. But what I'm thinking is, take a look at the headlines right now. Okay, just take a look online, or pick up a newspaper if anybody still uses newspapers, and you're seeing people going through who thought they had fantastic solutions now being sued because they used data that they didn't have permission to use. What does that do to your whole system, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, if you want to benefit from AI, in order to improve your business process, which is what they're trying to do. They want to make money. That's why you're in business, right? You want to make sure you do it properly so that you're getting the benefits, but you're not going to suffer from any of the risks that are being posed. You're going to have to find a way to mitigate that. And I know that's a poor way to sell records management. I know they always say, oh, no, you're not making money for us. But you could be, because what you're doing is helping them with this quality data to create a model that could better sell their cars, for example. I mean, it can be an increase in sales if they use that application for that goal, right? And we're the ones that help them do that if we help them work with this quality data in the first place.
Patricia, thanks so much. Remind everybody the name of the book and where they can get it.
It's plain old records and information management, which I see as the keystone to data governance, as well as AI governance and information governance. So it's going to be out by the end of the year, and it's from ALA Publishing. And Chris has kindly written a piece for us for our first chapter that I'm so excited about. So he's going to, I think, lay the foundation for what comes later.
Great. Patricia, thanks so much. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So Chris, great guest. I mean, she's done this obviously, but what I love is, I've had conversations with folks, in that space who, are kind of, well, you have the AI denier badge up today, but are really AI deniers and just trying to, drag their feet and do things the old way. And it's really refreshing. Patricia's really, coming out with this new edition of her book and really, adjusting to this new world. I think we need more and more of that in our business.
I picked that title tongue in cheek. To the very contrary, and I often get kind of poo-pooed of, oh, you don't support the technology, you're a Luddite and so forth. I'm like, no, I'm the exact opposite. I want the technologies to succeed. I want us to embrace this new stuff, but there's a right way to do it. There's you put a safety on a gun for a reason. And so I've always, throughout my career, going back to building spacecraft, the way you achieved your mission is, yes, go and try to do the right stuff, but also build some preventions against the bad stuff, because there's always bad stuff associated. So
Yeah.
And with Patricia, I love her energy in it. She takes a positive view. Yeah, we got to do this structure stuff and be thorough and so forth, but it doesn't have to be a drain on the organization or something that slows down your going, shooting for the stars, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back in 2 weeks again, every other Wednesday, live at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. In the meantime, you can go to irpaai.com, join our free membership, or schedule a complimentary briefing or coaching session. In the meantime, have a great week, everybody. Chris, let's try to stay on top of all these AI headlines. Our members need help.
Do what we can. There's a lot out there.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Cheers.